Good morning, everyone. I'm Laureen Garrod, Director of the TV Division at Reed Meadham. Welcome to MIPTV. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce MIPTV's opening Media Mastermind Keynote. Chris Albrecht, CEO of Starz, formerly Chairman and CEO of HBO. The man who changed television while at HBO through extraordinary, groundbreaking series, Sex and the City, The Sopranos, 6 Feet Under, just to mention a few, and who since 2010 has been reinventing Starz through powerful original programming. Speaking of which, we're very much looking forward tonight to the world premiere TV screening of Starz' new series, Power, right here in the Grand Auditorium. This morning, Chris will be chatting with Colin Callender, founder of Playground Entertainment. Chris and Colin have worked together for over 20 years while at HBO, creating some of the most acclaimed movies and miniseries of all times, in the process winning some 200 Emmys, Golden Globes, and other awards. Their collaboration continues today, creating award-winning projects that have worked very, very well internationally and here at MIP Markets. White Queen, Dancing on the Edge, and currently the 8-part miniseries, The Missing. Please give a very, very warm welcome to Chris Albrecht and Colin Callender.
Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. I really appreciate everybody being here. You know, the difference between the TV market and the film market is that if this was the film market, we'd all be on our way home from a party last night. The TV market, people seem to get up a lot earlier. So we are going to talk, Colin, my longtime friend and colleague, we're going to discuss the opportunities and challenges of co-productions in today's very competitive and increasingly opportunistic television landscape. But before we do that, in the name of shameless self-promotion, we would like to show you a clip of some of the programs that Starz is selling here, some examples of co-productions that we're involved with, and some things that Colin and Starz are doing together. So can we have the clip, please? Thank you. One program that is not included in that clip reel, because we're saving it for later, is Power, which we will be premiering tonight, the world premiere and the opening night premiere here. So we hope to see you all at our screening later. I think it's at 6:30. But Colin, co-productions.
Co-productions.
We've been doing them 20 years together, more than 20 years together, but you were doing them even before me.
Try 30 years ago.
Because you were a producer before you became an executive together. Tell me about when it all began before we sort of figured out all the challenges and problems together, because we solved all the challenges.
We've solved them all.
Yeah.
Which is why we're here.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly why we're here.
I mean, the truth is, you know, I first came to MIP 35 years ago. Back then, the market was primarily made up of state broadcasters. It was a very different world, and we were co-producing. I remember sitting on the Quasette with Herbert Kloiber and a wonderful guy in England called Patrick Dromgoole, who was quite a renegade back in those days, and we were producing a series of Robert Louis Stevenson's Kidnapped for ITV in England and for ZDF in Germany. And we were having a big discussion, a creative discussion about how many extras were there in the battle scenes, and Herbert was upset because there weren't enough extras. And I realized at the time that it wasn't a conversation about creativity, it was a conversation about trust. It was a conversation about two co-producers trusting or not trusting that each was actually on the same side. And I realized then that, as I look at the market now, although things have changed, the challenges of co-productions remain the same.
Yeah.
It's about trust, it's about relationships, and it's about matching process between different markets.
Well, the process is different. I think, you know, in the past, we tried to engineer co-productions. You know, you would have an idea that a bunch of people would put money in, and the deal is not even necessarily such a, a deal is a hurdle, but it's not really the hurdle. The hurdle is finding that process and sort of finding that creative vision. But even when you try to manage things or think you have it all figured out, I know we did Rome at HBO, which was a co-production between HBO, BBC, and Rai in Italy. And we thought, well, this is perfect, an American network that's going to give it, you know, that big push that usually can sell international sales around the world, a British cast, which a British network's going to embrace, and Italian history. And the irony was the show worked great in the US, worked well in England, and the Italians hated it because it was like infidels were sort of, doing their own history. So every time you think you have it figured out from a sort of structure point of view, it isn't enough, because as you say, it comes down to trust, and I think it comes down to some familiarity in a process. I think the miniseries area is one that is a little bit easier, a little bit unique, because you're not trying to repeat it. But in this world now where people are looking for these big, long-running series, I think trust and process become the keys to success. The American series model, the showrunner model, is very unique and has been one that's starting to be adopted by other countries. But you said something interesting to me backstage about the difference between the American showrunner and
Well, I mean, the showrunner, which is a model that I think a lot of people are trying to co-opt and work with. The showrunner is a writer-producer. I mean, certainly
in the series business.
In the series business. And certainly in television in England, and I think this is true of most European markets, so the producer is not necessarily a writer, but it's the producer that is actually responsible for delivering the show to the network, as against the showrunner. And they're very different people. And I think that there remains a tension between those two models, and I have seen over and over again the attempt to reconcile these two result in processes breaking down where it's just not clear whose vision, who's in charge of delivering the vision.
In a deal, it's obviously probably impossible for everyone to have final approval. I mean, this is a creative process. At some point, you have to move the ball forward. So usually one of the partners will have final approval, and the other partners have meaningful consultation. That is something that works well if there's trust. And I think one of the things where it works well is if there starts to be, for lack of a better word, an interpreter or someone in the middle who is actually working between all the partners and listening to what their needs are. In between the time I was at HBO and the time I was at Starz, I got involved in a European co-production, which was one of the Borgia projects. Not the Neil Jordan one, which was Spielberg and Showtime. Ironically, there were two Borgia projects at the same time. Projects seemed to flow in packs. I'd never seen a pirate pitch before, and all of a sudden there were like 8 pirate pitches that came in my door. But in this particular case, there was a German company, and there was a French company, and they had a vision of doing this show, but they wanted an American showrunner, and we found Tom Fontana, but then they came to Anthemopolis and to me and asked us to be executive producers. And what we were able to do was help Tom understand the needs of the different partners, because Tom is he's a classic American showrunner. He has a vision. He works great with a team, knows how to put together a writing staff. Writing staff, I think, very important element in ongoing series, because it allows you to have scripts ahead of time so that the partners can look at it, and even if they only have consultation, give their input. And it also allows there to be the ongoing delivery of yearly series, because if one person's writing, if one person tries to write all the episodes, whether it's 8, 10, 12, 13, that becomes sort of a weighty process. But you've now started to serve that role for Starz and for me in becoming a kind of expert producer in managing the sides that are involved in the deal, even when each side doesn't have equal say. Talk about White Queen and the different things that we've been doing there.
Well, I mean, let me go back to a story that happened. Very early on, one of the very first co-productions I did was a show that was actually the very first commission for Channel 4 in England, Nicholas Nickleby. And it was 9 hours long. It was based on a stage show. And there were 3 partners. There was Polygram that had the distribution rights, Mobil Oil in America that had the rights for America, and Channel 4. Channel 4 wanted to play it over 2 nights as 4 hours and 4.5 hours. Polygram wanted 9 one-hour episodes, and Mobil wanted 4 two-hour episodes. And I remember thinking, even though everybody creatively was on the same page, there was no way we could just deliver a show in that way. And I was a kid, I didn't know anything at that point, so I said I brought everyone together at the Albemarle Hotel in London. It was at the Roosevelt Room, and I sat everyone down at 9 o'clock, and there was all the various parties there. And I said, look, we've got this room for the whole day. Unless we can come out of this room by the end of the day with a shared understanding of how this show is going to play, we should all go on our different ways, because there's no way to reconcile all this. And I've realized that that's what you need to do right from the get-go, is to make sure everyone's on the same page and doing the same thing. But even when that's the case, you know, there are challenges that emerge, particularly when certain sort of problems arise.
There always are.
There always are problems, and our job as producers is anticipating those problems and then fixing them. And the way, culturally, the way different markets fix problems or even recognize problems is different. We've had experience recently with a show where we thought there was a problem, somebody else didn't. And my job in the end was to get in the middle of it and try and reconcile the two parties. And on White Queen, you know, interestingly, The White Queen was a massive success for Starz in America. It wasn't quite so successful for the BBC, but
they had huge expectations.
They had huge expectations, but
and again, it was their history.
So it was their history,
right?
History,
while it may seem to be a great arena for co-production, is not always the easy road that it would seem to be.
No, I mean, this was an example of an entirely British show, which you guys at Starz bought into. And it was an enormously bigger success, you know, in the States than here. I think that what's right at the heart of it, though, is who is executing the show, and is it the network, is it the studio, is it the producer, is it the showrunner? And different markets have different ways of doing it, and that's where the tension tends to arise, and that's why there's a need really for someone in the middle who can really take control of it all.
Well, I mean, in my experience, which is, you know, I've been doing this a while, it is the producer that you have to count on. You know, when we were at HBO, and I think HBO probably still has this as part of their DNA, they don't turn control over to anybody. We didn't turn control over to anybody. We absolutely had to have the final say. And if you're putting up the most money, you can expect to do that. Starz, which is trying to expand its originals and trying to expand pretty quickly, we don't have the same pile of cash that, you know, some other networks have. So we've had to go into situations and find our way into good material, even if we weren't necessarily going to have that final say. And it was a very big decision for me, and I think the first time I did it was on White Queen, to be able to say, okay, we just have consultation. BBC, final say on the scripts, final say on the casting, final say on the budget. What we did in the beginning was we agreed on parameters. We wrote a script, or I think it was the first script, and we said, okay, this is the template. Everything needs to kind of feel like this. There were certain, you know, content things that we talked about, and even though we were asked our opinion, we needed to trust in you and needed to trust in them. But in the middle was Company Pictures, who we had worked with before.
Well, and that was the key, really, because in the end, the producer was someone we'd had a long experience with. We worked with very successfully in the past. We trusted. We knew their process. Their process was similar to our process, and you know, you took a leap of faith, and it worked.
But they had also, I mean, they were a company that was interested in quality. I think the thing that I'm seeing now, and it's even in formats. You know, formats have become an interesting sort of backdoor into co-productions, scripted formats. Obviously, unscripted formats have been around for a while, but we're seeing scripted formats come from Europe, Israel, Scandinavia, seem to be two very successful places. There's a format from France that's working successfully now in the US. But I think what is probably true in co-productions is the same thing that's true if you're fully financing something for your own network, is that you got to find a good idea. You have to have someone who you believe in, who has a vision and can execute on that vision. And then you have to make sure that they have the resources necessary to fulfill their vision, which you, as either sole partner, primary partner, or minority partner, are buying in on. And it's like you said before about that agreement that you had to forge on Nicholas Nickleby. If everyone has an agreement of the vision, then I think it's important, and it's difficult, but it's important for the financial partners, the networks. Networks shouldn't produce television series. Producers should produce television series. And so I think it's important for us to lay back and allow that process to happen, because in the end, I think if you have a pure vision that's been executed on, the chances of it being successful. I always, people always ask me, what's your definition of success in a show? And I would say, well, if I look at what's on the screen and I say to myself, that's what we intended to make. That's the show that we talked about in the beginning. To me, if I look at something and, well, wait, what was that? What's that? That wasn't what we talked about. It may end up doing well, and maybe I didn't, maybe I was inebriated when we had the initial conversation and don't remember what we were talking about. But my first mark is that what we set out to do? And I think in a co-production, it's really important to be able to sit back and just wait and trust that the partners that you've had all these discussions with beforehand are going to be people who are going to execute on the agreement that you had. Obviously, track record, company pictures we talked about, but you've got a track record. One of the things for me that's so important to have you involved in something, you saw clips from The Missing, which is another co-production now that we're doing with BBC, because we did White Queen with BBC. We were the minority partner. Turned out great. Those are great people. Ben Stevenson and his team at BBC are terrific. But they also trust you. And now we have The Missing, which we're doing. I watched the first day of dailies, and I just can't wait to get the episodes in, because I know I haven't needed to watch this along the way, because not only do I have a producer in the middle and a production company that we've worked with before, even though there's been some management changes over at company. But I have a network partner that I've now been, through this with, where they've been the lead dog. And I feel like not only is my voice heard, but I don't feel like I don't need to have the best idea in the room.
But I agree completely as a starting point that shared vision is of the essence. But the process can get in the way of realizing that shared vision. Casting, for example. There is a serious, casting these days is probably one of the most provocative aspects of a co-production. The tension between the need for a star and the need for the best actor. The tension between wanting a good actor to play the role and finding an actor that will actually agree to do, to have options to last and run through series.
Which is harder for actors outside the US. They're not used to that.
Absolutely. And then there's the process of the different buyers' expectations. I was involved in a show called Dracula, which was co-produced between NBC and Sky, and we all had a very clear and shared vision of what the show was, but in truth, NBC wanted the show for a Friday night at 10 o'clock as part of a sort of horror fantasy slot, and Sky wanted the show to relaunch Sky Vision, which was appealing to women. So even though there was a shared vision of the actual show, when it came to looking at the dailies, looking at cuts. NBC wanted to push it, was pulling in certain directions, Sky in others, and our job as the producers in the middle was to reconcile that. We had a shared vision, but when it came down to literally, do we start an episode with an action moment, or do we start the episode with a character moment, it became a challenge. And so the process can get in the way.
And the thing about, obviously, as we all know, the thing about making television series different than making movies. I mean, film has this process as well, but there are so many stages of this creative process. So obviously you start with the idea, which people get excited about. There's a deal, which isn't part of the creative process, but it's part of the process. Then there's a script. Then there's a director. There's casting. Then there's, dailies, DP, lighting. What should it look like? What should the costumes look like? All of these things are potential for disagreement. Then the footage comes in, and then, as you said, then there's the cut. And particularly in co-productions, broadcast network, Starz, premium network, basic tier network in the US, channels in other countries, people even have different lengths, different formats.
Yeah.
I mean, whether you're editing for...
Whether they're commercial breaks
exactly,
or not.
Whether you're editing for commercial breaks, whether you're editing 54 minutes, which is, about a length that we would like on Starz, or whether you're editing for, what were the NBC episodes?
40-something.
And
Sky was longer.
And Sky was longer. Yeah. So, I mean, that in and of itself is a very, very, very challenging scenario, because the sort of process kind of never really ends. And I do think that all of that is aided when we go back to that idea of central vision, agreed upon in the beginning, executor, who's been entrusted to deliver that, and then trust between the partners to lean back a little bit and understand that there are so many different stages, that there is time to get your voice heard. Why do you think formats all of a sudden are coming from places outside the US?
It's really interesting, isn't it? Because there haven't been, traditionally the format business was between the UK and the US.
Right.
There was certainly a long tradition of successful comedy transfers.
Back in the Taffner days.
Back in the Taffner days. Very few British shows, scripted dramas, have actually succeeded in their American versions, whereas clearly there's a slew of Israelis, you mentioned Scandinavian. I think it's a very good question. I don't think there's a simple answer to it, except that I think that what we partly did at HBO was focus on character, focus on ideas and characters. And I think that, oddly, the success of the shows like The Killing was a character-based show. It was a thriller, but it was really about character. That's in part what distinguished it. Interestingly, in England right now, I think there's an obsession with a certain sort of genres that have driven what they're doing. So I don't know. It's a very interesting. I don't think there's an easy answer to it, but it's clear that there's a change.
And there are actually two. I mean, certainly when I talk about co-production, it's okay. Let's take one idea, a few different buyers, and create one program that we're all going to air. That is, as we've been talking about, a sort of unique challenge, especially in an ongoing series business where you have to be able to repeat that year after year, hoping that your partner wants to continue, because then you end up in a situation where Rome, for instance, by the third year, the BBC was like, 2 years, thanks. The Italians, 2 years, thanks. And we were left going, well, I don't know that we want to pay the full freight for this show. But in the format, what you really have is this sort of a pure idea that instead of trying to get a bunch of people to agree, you're actually being able to take something that you've already seen. There is a little bit of a template, almost like a novel, like we were adapting White Queen from a novel, but you have almost a book, which is this piece of work that's existed in another country, and then what people are doing is they're finding ways to adapt it. So The Bridge was the show where it was the bridge between, where was it, Sweden and Norway, I think.
Yep.
And then when we heard the pitch in the U.S., it was, well, it could be the bridge between Canada and the U.S. No, how about the bridge between U.S. and Mexico? But you know, it's something that buyers can look at. The company that controls the rights can be involved and can keep rights. So it's still a co-production of sorts, but it's kind of really almost like selling your idea to somebody else and almost being okay if they produce it, because you're getting your money from selling the format itself. Whereas a true co-production where everybody is a business partner, you know, I think is still going to be, while there's more opportunities and the more that different countries start to adopt some of the same processes, that I think is going to remain a challenge that can be best accomplished by partners who are either very experienced in doing it, partners who have a great willingness to do it, and sometimes willingness, as I said with us at Starz, is created by need. We had a need for more programs, and we had a need to stretch our budget. So, this world of co-productions is still evolving, and now this element of formats.
But you know, the formats don't always work. There's a famous story. There was a show in England called Upstairs, Downstairs, which is a sort of precursor to Downton Abbey, which was about the people who lived upstairs, the posh guys who lived upstairs, and the people who lived downstairs underneath. And there was an American version of that was made. And it didn't work in America at all, because what was so specific, culturally specific to upstairs and downstairs in England was that the people who lived downstairs believed they should be living downstairs. Now, in America, anyone living downstairs believes they should be living upstairs. So the very central premise of the show didn't translate, even though the storytelling would on the surface seem to. So I do think that one of the really interesting things about co-productions, whether it's formats or shows themselves, is sometimes the cultural specificity of the show and the fact that it's rooted in a particular time and place, but somehow transcends that time and place, that makes some of these shows most successful. And sometimes it's when the deal is on the screen, when you've got an English dog, a French horse, and a German cow, when you've actually had to make those sort of those compromises to service every co-producer, that's when things go wrong. So it's the tension between that cultural specificity on the one hand, and on the other hand, meeting the demands of the individual buyers and broadcasters.
I mean, look, obviously between the UK and America, there's a common language, so these things become easier. But imagine, I mean, your upstairs, downstairs example, imagine if people tried to do the American version of Downton Abbey. I mean, it translates because it's so good. The cultural specificity of it is one of the things that makes it good, but no one seems to have a problem in the US buying into that. I know I've seen things like The Returned or the original version of The Bridge. I've looked at shows, even when we were back at HBO and someone brought me Queer as Folk, which I think was a Channel 4 show.
Yep.
And I looked at it and I thought, why would I try to remake this? This is already really good. And so when people bring formats to me of a show, one of the concerns that I have is, can I do better than that? What would be unfortunate, and I think you see it happen in format shows, not so much unscripted, but in the scripted world, is the project that's created off the format doesn't somehow have that same essence that the original program had. And I think that goes back to the fact that the original program had a central vision.
Prime Suspect.
Right.
You know, what made Prime Suspect work, actually, at its heart, was Helen Mirren.
Right.
So talent. When you try and take that show and relocate it, which they did, whatever the inherent merits were or not of that show, it didn't have Helen Mirren. It was a different show.
Magic.
It was the magic.
I think no matter how many different things you put together, I always say, you can have the best talent, the best deal, the best producers, the best intentions, the best execution. At the end, we need a little magic. It's kind of the fun that's in our business and one of the frustrating things. We have run out of time. Colin and I have been talking for over 20 years. We could talk for 20 years now.
But ending on magic is a good idea.
Ending on magic is a good idea. I'll be doing some tricks in the lobby. We do appreciate you coming and listening to us. This is a great arena to talk about co-productions. It's an important business for all of us, and one that we should devote some time to. So again, thank you all. Colin, thank you, my friend.
Thank you.
Everyone have a good market.